Friday night, I took my wife Vicki out on a really hot date. I had bought the discount movie tickets in advance and then took her to one of my very favorite restaurants. We went, that's right across the street from the theater. We went to McDonald's. Guys, listen, $9.88, quarter pounder with cheese. We split the fries just like in the old days and whatever she had to drink. And so we're there with just a few minutes before the movie starts. And we're getting ready to wrap up, the last couple of fries, last bites of that cheeseburger. And in walks, this is great, in walks a family with four kids age 6 and under. And it was a rolling catastrophe. They came in and they had a plan. It was a great plan. I'm sure in theory it looked great. Dad took the kids, one of which, the youngest, was in a car seat and carrier, and got them all together, and Mom went up to the front to order. And as soon as Mom went around the corner from where Dad was left with the kids, they all just scattered. And they all went chasing, the ones who could walk, chased Mom to make sure she got the order right. And Dad is left like, no, wait, come back, sit here. Lost cause. And for the next 20 minutes or so, I watched with just a growing grin on my face, remembering, and I thought two things. I thought, number one, that is really great to see. Number two, I thought, I'm so glad our kids are not that age anymore, because we had done that at McDonald's. And so I couldn't help but on the way out the door, I stopped by because our seat was just over from ours, and I said, this is just great to see. I'm so happy to see a family here. And like it occurred to me that I'm that guy now. Right? I'm like the old guy talking to the young guy. I'm thinking, when did I become my dad? And the guy just had that harried look on his face. Like, oh, yeah, almost like he had to apologize for the chaos that was going around. And he said, and he introduced me to his 6-year-old daughter, the oldest. And he said, tonight was her turn to choose where we went to dinner. That's a great responsibility for a 6-year-old. And he said, she chose McDonald's because she wanted ice cream. There's ice cream there. And here it is, the food is very good. Now, honestly, I mean, it's not all bad and it's cheap. And here's what I love about that little 6-year-old girl, right? When she was given a task, when she was promoted to the responsibility of choosing where the entire family was going to have their Friday night meal, she made a decisive choice, and she got them to have their meal at McDonald's because the ice cream is there and the food was real good too. I love that. Here's a question. When you are given some additional responsibility in life, maybe a recent promotion, or maybe you've graduated from high school or from college and now you're sort of out in the big old world out there. Or on your job, a new project has landed on your desk. In other words, you have some additional responsibility. You have some freedom of action. You're given responsibility or put in charge of something, but what do? 2 Samuel chapter 5, turn there. We're resuming this weekend our study of the life of David, second and greatest king in ancient Israel. And when we get to 2 Samuel 5, we find David is exactly at that place of having to decide, what do I do now? David was made king. This had been a dream and a promise for 15 years in his life, and now he has the opportunity. What do we do? You've been there. You've worked hard. You've planned. You've dreamed, and then all of a sudden you have the opportunity to act, and sometimes you're like, what do I do now? When given responsibility, how do I respond? What should I do? How do I know what the next step should be for me? And so, what do we do when we have enjoyed promotion? Before I begin reading to you from 2 Samuel chapter 5, can I read something for you that David wrote as he was near this season of his life? It's from Psalm 16. And it's one of those things that gives us a glimpse into the heart of this great man who would go on to lead Israel through its golden age. And Psalm 16 is David thought of his responsibilities, of the promise that God gave him. He would one day be king and provide care for God's people. And now that day is here, and you're feeling the weight of the responsibility. What do? Psalm 16, verse 8. David said, I have set the Lord always before me. That's really important to remember as you have some choices in life, as you are granted more authority and more freedom, and you have the promotion. I've set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. I can have some confidence about this new role I have in life. I can have some confidence about my future because I have looked to God, and he's promised to go with me through whatever I face. And then Psalm 16, verse 11 really answers the value proposition. Why? Given the promotion or the options or the opportunities that I have in the future, why would I set my heart to follow hard after God? You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. You will not find your joy in that thing you do, ultimately. The promise and the promotion and the freedom and the responsibility that come with that will not ultimately satisfy. It is in the presence of God that there is a fullness of joy. So as you pursue that dream, as you step into this role with more responsibility, make sure you are doing that with the power of the presence of God in your life. There's the joy. And hey, your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Sometime we need to do a study. I guess I'm talking to me right now. Scott, sometime we need to do a series on how much God calls his people to live with joy and pleasure in life. The pleasure of recognizing it's near God that we find our greatest satisfaction and joy. And David, as he steps into the new role, king, all the trouble and all the joy and all the problems and all the thrill of living out your dreams. And David said, I choose to be near God, and I'll find my joy there. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, David, when he's made king, acts decisively. He takes some risks. They're calculated, but he takes some risks. And look at chapter 5 of 2 Samuel. And look at verse 6. We're going to read the first paragraph, verses 6 through 12. David's first act, or one of the very first acts, David takes as king, is to establish a capital for this nation, Israel, and he's going to establish it at a place called Jerusalem. Now that, by the way, was a brilliant strategic move. Jerusalem was right on the border between David's homeland in the south and the other tribes of Israel in the north. I mean, while on the one hand, David is king, it's pretty good to be king, right? Okay, good. Thank you. I just want to make sure it's a good thing to be king. And so David is king, but what he's king of is a kind of a disparate a group of 12 tribes. Think of 12 states sort of fighting with one another. And what David will do in his reign over those 12 tribes is unify them and lead them to their golden age. And he begins by establishing a capital. And the capital is the crown jewel of the Middle East. It's Jerusalem. It sits on a hilltop. It at that point had been defended twice against previous Israeli attacks. And David decides, I'm going to put my capital city there. And so chapter 5, verse 6, the king and his men went out to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land. So at this point, Jerusalem held by a tribe called the Jebusites. And they said to David, you shall not come in here, but the blind and the lame will ward you off, thinking David cannot come in here. Well, what's that all about? Well, in the modern world, we say that's trash talking. The Jebusites from the hilltop of Jerusalem looking down on David, figuring out a way how to conquer that city, they basically said, listen, David, we'll take whoever in our city is blind and we'll make him the watcher at the gate. And we'll take anybody who can't really walk very well, anybody who's lame, and we'll give them the guard duty. We are not worried, David, about you. Anybody can fight you off. And David took that personally. He said, actually, I will do that. In fact, look at verse 7. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion. What is that? It's one of those hilltops. Zion, an ancient city. They thought, no way you get that. David did it. And I love the next phrase. David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. And once he conquered it, you know what he said? What's a good name for this new city? How about if we call it David? That's a good name. We'll call it David. And so one of the hills in Jerusalem, the city of David, the most ancient part of that city. And it's interesting the way they did it. Excavators have discovered that likely the way that David got access to the city was through a series of caves that had been carved to provide water during sieges. But David somehow and his men snuck through those caves, climbed up into the city, conquered it, and he had success, his very first thing he tried. Look at verse 9. David lived in the stronghold, and he called it the city of David. And he built it from the millow inward. The millow is a word for sort of expanding the walls by backfilling, and then you build a foundation in city. David, early on, first few months or years of his reign as king, he wins some battles. He establishes a headquarters in Jerusalem. He names the city after himself, and he begins to expand that. He begins to grow it. Look at verse 10. And David became greater and greater. That's good to have written about your career path, isn't it? David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. Can I say a word to you about what we learned from 2 Samuel 5? God promotes you to serve his priorities, not your own. God promotes us to serve his priorities, not our own. You've been given additional responsibilities. You have a promotion on the job. You have a little more freedom than you used to have. You have a larger office, a larger budget. You have a better raise. You have a credit card that gives you a lot of freedom. People report to you now. And the temptation is to think, I feel pretty good about my life right now. I feel like, things are really beginning to break my way. At that time, and by the way, I hope they are breaking your way. At that time, we must remember God is the one who has brought us promotion, and he's done it so that we might serve his priorities, not our own. Psalm 75 makes it very clear. Not from the east, nor from the west, nor from the desert comes promotion. It is God who lifts one up and puts another down. God has given you the opportunities that you have right now so that you might use them for his priorities. And David recognized that. Look down at verse 11. Not only is David gaining recognition right around Jerusalem and among the tribes of Israel, but David's popularity is beginning to spill over into the lands around him. Verse 11, Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David. Now, Tyre was on the north, it's on the seacoast. It was a very important ancient city. Think of Chicago along the shores of Lake Michigan and the ships that come and go bringing all kinds of material. That was Tyre. And this king of Tyre says, David, you're the new rising power in the region. I want to be on your good side. You get the promotion, you begin to walk down the hall and people are like, oh, hey, I know her. I know him. That's that new vice president. Feel pretty good about that. And David's there. Look at verse 11. Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and certainly the messengers said, hey, congratulations, well done. But look at that. Not only, and cedar trees and carpenters and masons who built David a house. The thing that he had been promised by God, he received, king. The promotion he'd sought and seemed so far away, his. First thing he attempts in the new role, success. And he begins to expand, and the scriptures say that he's getting greater and greater, so much so that foreign kings are saying, hey, David, great job, let me build you a house. And verse 12, I spent a little time on this week. It's very interesting to me. Look at how verse 12 begins. And David knew. I have the word knew, K-N-E-W. I have that underlined in my Bible. Because the word means grasped, recognized, realized. In other words, as all of this is going on, as he's getting promotion, as he's having success, as he's getting fame and freedom, a light comes into his mind. He looks over all that's happened in the short time of his reign, and he knew something. He grasped something. The Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he, that is the Lord, had exalted David's kingdom, and I have this underlined, for the sake of his people, Israel. God promotes us to serve his priorities, not our own. And early on, having tasted great success after this promotion to king, David grasped the fact that God brought me this opportunity so I could serve God's people, not myself. Will you remember that? A single person, the freedom you have as a single to give your life fully to education or to your job or promotion or start your own business, and God begins to grant you success. God is doing that so you can serve his priorities. Don't you forget that. Married person, recognize marriage is mostly not about you or about what you want. Marriage is about making our family an example in a very dark and mixed up world of what it means for God to love someone without question. Husbands, it's upon us not to spend a whole lot of time saying, what am I not getting out of the marriage, if only this or if only that. It's upon us to say, how can I love my wife as Christ loves and gives himself for the church? Wives, it's not so much about complaining about what your husband is or isn't doing that you'd like for him to do or not do. It's saying, how can I bring all of my best to bear on this marriage in such a way that God fulfills his purpose in my husband's life? In other words, marriage is not about you. It's about something greater than you. It's about putting Jesus Christ on display in the marriage. Parents, having children is not about having an easy time or getting the kids out of your hair, or let me just get them grown and out the door. Marriage and parenting is about one of the most important roles you'll ever serve in life. That is, as a father or a mother who is called to shape that child so that he or she grows up to serve God's purpose in that child's generation. And those frustrations and those joys and sometimes those heartbreaks, we are in the midst of all of those called to love our kids and help them walk through that path toward maturity. Never forget that God has you where you are to serve his priorities. God promotes us to serve his priorities, not ourselves. And the thing I love about recognizing that, when I realize it's not about me, that's so good. Why don't we say that together, right? We're going to say it's not about me. Ready? 1, 2, 3. It's not about me. Yeah, you didn't say that with much conviction. Let's try it again. 1, 2, 3. It's not about me. Here's the benefit of understanding that. It lowers my frustration. It clears my vision so I can see. And it helps me to be able to raise my eyes up from myself for what I'm not getting or what my perceived slights are and recognize God in heaven has called me to do something in this world. And this world's going to be different and better because I fulfilled that calling. And God has brought me to a place of promotion so that I can serve him and his priorities. David got that. He recognized that. And that's why it's a little surprising, verse 13 through 16, the next paragraph, because after David had such a strong start, he took some missteps. And this paragraph is going to reveal for us what has actually become a pattern, or later will become a pattern in David's life. Verse 13, David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he came from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. What's that all about? Well, it was common practice in those days in the ancient world that kings, as part of their show of power, would have harems. A concubine is sort of a quasi-wife, sort of a legal arrangement, but the purpose is not bearing children. The purpose is having lots of good sex. This is David indulging his flesh. This is David, for some reason, after having started so well, saying, you know what? I deserve this. I've earned it. No, David, you haven't. As a matter of fact, Deuteronomy 17:17 very specifically says the king must not multiply wives. And yet we read, David took more concubines and more wives. This sows the seeds of David's greatest failure, the source of the greatest heartache in his family. Here's the pattern we see beginning to be evident in David's life. And it's interesting how sometimes as you grow and as you have more responsibility and the freedom that comes with that, you can begin to indulge some things and patterns become evident. Here's the pattern in David's life. He indulged himself in particular sensuality. David was a passionate man. You can read anything he's written and you realize there was a boiling heart in there that just loved to enjoy life, and he gave full rein and vent to his sexuality in ways that were very unhealthy and sinful. The second part of that pattern in David's life was not only sensuality, the second pattern in his life was an avoidance of conflict when it came to his family. As gifted as David was as a military commander, as an administrator of an entire kingdom, as a leader of men, he chose to be that inept at home. The battles he would fight against enemies, he chose not to fight in his own family. And it would sow discord and hurt and heartache and the greatest failure of his life. Be careful. Along with the promotion, along with the opportunity, along with the newfound freedom and the little larger office and maybe the company car and the credit card, along with all that comes subtle temptations. We can begin to think, I've earned this. I've accomplished some things in life. I deserve it. And David said yes to his passions and no to his family time after time, and it brought him to ruin. Be careful. Promotion is a gift from God, but God gave you the promotion to pursue His priorities, not what you think you need to make you happy or me. Next paragraph, beginning in verse 17. Promotion, elevation, freedom, success. And as is almost always the case, when you get a new job or a little more responsibility, what that brings to you is problem. In this case, David had problems. And their names were spelled Philistines. And so look at 17. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up and searched for David. Now, do you suppose they showed up to say, David, congratulations? David's okay when he's living in the cave, but when he becomes king and he's a mighty military guy, all of a sudden the enemies nearby are saying, whoa, 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 we better stop this. And that's what they try to do. Look at verse 18. The Philistines had come up and had spread out in the valley of Rephaim. Now, it doesn't mean much to us, but you get your map out. Rephaim is 1 mile from Jerusalem. Somebody remind me, what was the name of the city David made his capital? What was the name? Jerusalem. In other words, David's problems were very nearby, and they began right away. Don't say it out loud, but some of you who have some responsibility or you've recently got a promotion, you're like, yeah, tell me about it. I thought the problems were out there. Boy, the problems are nearby. And I didn't even get the ink dry on signing the contract, and my problem started. Yes, exactly. And when you have the promotion, when you're given additional responsibility, you will find that you have purchased for yourselves a new set of problems larger than your last problem. So let's see how David handled that. verse 19, David inquired of the Lord. Now stop for a minute. David was king to a large extent because he was a brilliant military guy. And he had won battle after battle after battle. So here he has established as new king. He's got some victories under his belt. He's established himself in the city, and he's gotten a house built for himself, and he's done some good. And so when he gets up in that new house, and he looks out the western window, and he looks down into the valley of Rephaim, and he sees all the Philistines there, and he's a general, you might think, easy, go to war. But God had taught David something in those years of wandering. God had taught David to slow down a minute and seek God's counsel. You have a lot of authority. You have a lot of freedom. You're looking at that next promotion. Slow down before you act. David did this. Verse 19, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. Before he just launched and said, okay, guys, get on the horses, here we go. He said, wait, Lord, how do you want me to handle this problem? Lord, you brought me to this place of promotion. Now, will you guide me as I deal with the problems that come along with the promotion? And he heard from the Lord. The Lord said, go, I'm going to give you victory. And sure enough, he went out against them in the valley of Rephaim, and they had victory, and he beat them back. But now listen, look at verse 22. And the Philistines came up yet again and spread out where? In the valley of Rephaim. It's happening again. You think you beat this problem, and that problem springs right up again. Tell me you've been there. Good. Somebody else besides Greg, tell me you've been there. Right? Am I the only guy that sometimes looks at his life and says, why does the same problem come up over and over and over again? You ever feel like you're on the merry-go-round? Oh, I've seen this scenery before. Oh, look, the same scenery. How about that? Same scenery, right? God's doing something about teaching us to be faithful to Him. And so, I don't know if it's the next month or the next year, but same enemy, same battle. Get up, look out the west window. Hup, there they're back again. You've just beat them. The natural thing to say is, I'm going to go do it again. Here's how I solved this problem last time. But that's not how David responds. Verse 23. And when David inquired of the Lord said, you shall not go up. Sometimes you attack a problem a different way. Sometimes rather than just strap on the sword and go out and fight the same battle the same way, you stop and say, Lord, I've faced this before, and you gave me victory before. Do I do the same thing? And in this case, the Lord said, no. You're going to go fight the battle, but I want you to go around from behind and make a flanking attack to them. I love that from a battle standpoint, military standpoint. He was going to cut off their opportunity for retreat. He was really going to take it to them. And so, verse 24, when you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, rouse yourself. So there must have been some grove of trees where the battlefield was. When the wind begins to rise and it sounds like there's marching going on, I'm there, go fight them. And then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines. And I had this underlined. I love this. This so encapsulates what makes David such a great leader. David did as the Lord commanded. And he struck down the Philistines from Geba to Gezer. Now, that's not an old guy. That's two cities, right, Dr. Hoffmeyer? That's Geba and Gezer. And they went on and they won the battle. And so David was able to overcome that enemy. Now, a question for us. Hopefully, I don't know, because I don't pretend to know what's in your problem today, but hopefully you don't have an army stacked against you. Are we pretty safe with that? But we do have our problems. And hopefully we have opportunities. We've been given promotion. We have newfound freedom. We have the opportunity to do something. We have a large task in front of us. Question is, what do I do? What should my steps be? So let me give you the three things I learned this week in studying the life of David as it related to his promotion to king. The first is this. Remember, you're serving someone else. The first is this: serve a greater cause. Serve a greater cause. A true or false, it's not about me. True. It's not about you either. And will you recognize that you have been given this responsibility? You've been brought to this place of promotion so that you serve the Lord's priorities? Remember that in your marriage. Remember that with your children. Remember that on your job. Remember that about this church. Pursue the priorities. Pursue the opportunity. Take the promotion. By all means, do that. And as you do, never forget, it's a greater cause you serve. This will clear your vision. This will give you strength to go on. One of my favorite Old Testament narratives has to do with a woman named Esther. And she's a heroine. She's a great hero of the faith because even though she was powerful and influential, she was a queen in Persia many hundreds of years after David lived. And she was also hard-pressed. She had been promoted, but she was in trouble. In fact, her people, the Jews, were in trouble. There was an idea to destroy those who had Jewish heritage, and the Persian king had actually authorized the treasury and the army to go ahead and exterminate Jews. And Esther's uncle, Mordecai, also very influential, and he said to her, Esther, you need to talk to the king. You're the queen. You need to talk to the king. You got to stop this madness. And Esther hesitated. I mean, it's understandable. She said, if I go to the king and he says no, I'm Jewish, and it could cost me my life. I love her uncle Mordecai's response to that. Esther, deliverance for Israel will come from somewhere. In other words, God's going to take care. He's going to accomplish this. But who knows, but you have come to the kingdom for just such a time as this. Never forget, you have come to this place of promotion or opportunity. You have come to this place of increased responsibility and freedom and authority for just such a time as this. Because we serve someone greater, you should face the opportunities and the challenges with the most courage of anybody on your team. And you should never forget, nor should I, that we serve someone greater. We serve a greater cause. Second, do not compromise. Do not compromise. It is inevitable. With more responsibility and more freedom and more success comes subtle temptations. Often those temptations seem to flow from, well, it's just my job. Comes along with the turf. And we can begin to compromise those very convictions and disciplines that brought us success in the first place. Will you just put a warning in your heart to say, I will not turn from God. I will not indulge the flesh. I will not ignore my family. And let me be very honest and blunt with you. If you are dancing with the devil right now, you have got to stop. You cannot compromise yourself to success. If you are playing with fire in your relationships at work or in the home or in the community, you will get burned. Back off. Deal seriously and deal severely with the calling temptation to sin in your life. Do not sow the seeds now that seem to bring pleasure that will bear a bitter fruit down the road. Do not compromise. Recognize the siren call of temptation for what it is. It's an invitation to disaster. Break it off. Third, obey God humbly. I mean, honestly, for this third part, I thought, well, I should have something a little more profound than that. But honestly, that's it. David, he's promoted. David has all the opportunity. David has success after success. And when he faces the next battle, he simply pauses and said, Lord, what do you want me to do? That's humility. He had already demonstrated he was a good military guy. Why would he stop? Because he wanted to hear what God had to say. As you gain promotion and freedom and power and influence that goes with it, by all means, do your best. Push forward. Take great risks. But when you hear a word from God, listen carefully and obey that. And God will bring success your way. We invite the team to lead us in a closing song of worship. And what I'm going to do at the close of that song is I'm going to pray a benediction for Hebrews 13 over you. It's a promise about God beginning and completing His work of equipping you to do that thing you're called to do, to be the one you are called to be. And in the meantime, let me pray over us. Well, Father, thank you so much for your faithfulness to us. And thank you, Father, for the opportunity you have placed before us. We do not want to walk away from that or turn our back on it. God, I pray that you would raise up from this congregation, among young men and women, the next generation of leaders of business, the next inventors and educators and physicians and engineers, those who will shape our culture. God, bring them out of here, this group, I pray. And Father, as they gain success and as they gain notoriety, as they have freedom and influence, God, help them to know you've given it to them to serve your priority. May we do that, Lord. Father, I pray that in that humble obedience, you would do beyond what we can even ask or imagine through our lives, our families, and this church. We ask this in the name of Jesus, our Savior. And again, God's people agreed by saying,